Yeah, my name is Dominic. My friends normally call me Dom. Before punk, when dinosaurs used to roam the earth, well, I was born in 1964. I actually started getting into chart music probably fairly early in the 1970s. I can remember the first record I ever bought, saving up for it, or nattering my mum and dad for some money to buy it. Believe it or not, it was Hello, Hello, I'm Back Again by Gary Glitter, which I thought was brilliant at the time. And whatever happened to him. By things like by Gary Glitter, David Bowie, 10cc. And these were all bands who, were probably in the charts, and you sort of think, oh, that's all right, that's interesting. What I remember then about as the 70s progressed, it was a lot of fairly mainstream stuff I thought was a bit dull. I liked some of the stuff that was in the charts that you perhaps wouldn't associate with, well, you wouldn't associate at all with punk, but things like the Isley Brothers and Real Thing, talented people and good singers, but again, nothing I would be bothered about going to see, but I could appreciate the stuff. And I liked other sort of rock music as well. Peter Gabriel, first time I ever went to a concert was to see him when I was 13. And after Genesis, it was more about rock music. It was, and first time I'd ever been to see something, so it was quite impressive. And around the time when I was 13, I was living in Bradford, hence my accent. I remember there was a lad I knew who started talking about the Sex Pistols. I think the guy that his mum lived with was a DJ on local radio. They used to get like promotional copies of singles. Now, it was at the time when the Sex Pistols had released God Save the Queen. And the mystique about it all was that, well, it was banned, so you couldn't hear it on Radio 1. The fact that it was banned, even at the age of 13, I thought, what's going on here? There must be something unusual about it. And I remember seeing the blue cover, picture of the Queen on it. I think it was Jamie Reed's artwork. Just listening to it, I thought, it's like nothing I'd ever heard before. It weren't like the Glitter Band or David Bowie or anything else. It was just such at the time, a real assault on your senses. And I remember thinking, I've just got to find out more about what this is all about, punk music. And so I remember buying things like Record Mirror at the time, which was one of the bit like Sounds or Melody Maker, Enemy. Record Mirror was something that used to feature articles about a lot of punk bands. And I remember hearing about bands like The Saints, The Damned, The Clash. Of course, up in Bradford. Well, what would we know about that? So the time before punk was that. It was, and again, I still like some of the stuff that David Bowie did in the 1970s. Absolutely brilliant. But I suppose it then changes when you hear punk music, because I could see a lot of people were really into it, and you've made me think about why it was, and was it just the music, or was it that there was something else going on? I think it was something very different, and it was hard to necessarily know what it was. So I'd have been about 13 when I heard about the Sex Pistols. I did eventually buy that single and bought it, and I bought Holidays in the Sun as well, possibly a few other bits of punk music, but I didn't have a load of money. I eventually got paper round and milk round, earned money that way. So it was really being a bit judicious with what I spent my money on. Now, one album I got, I always think of them as being in the, initially at least, as being in the punk, I don't like the word movement, but you know what I mean, that sort of genre, was the Skids. That first album, I think it was called Scared to Dance. That was brilliant. I could listen to that now. Outstanding, really amazing talent. People talk about punk bands couldn't play. I'll tell you what, they could. There was real talent there. The fact that they might have been playing something that was hard on the ear, it's still got to be played and was quite something to hear. So I'd listen to stuff like that. Did I go to many gigs? You know, I've been racking my brains trying to think what was the first punk gig that I went to. I can't be 100% certain about this, but one thing I do remember is that there was, in fact, it's still there now, a big venue in Bradford. It's called St George's Hall. And St George's Hall is like, it's a proper concert venue. It's lovely inside. But you get promoters putting mainstream bands on there. And one time I went to watch the Tom Robinson band. Now, I quite liked them, wasn't mad about them, but in Bradford you sort of went to see whoever was being put on. So I remember going to see the Tom Robinson band, and I would have been, I'm guessing, about 14 or 15, something like that. There wasn't a big deal then about getting into a venue, you just went. But supporting them, it says it's support band. No idea who this support band was. Saw them on the thing, on the ticket. But it was Stiff Little Fingers. And when they came on, I couldn't believe it. What a raw sound. I knew immediately, everyone were going absolutely bonkers, dancing around it. And I thought, everybody else knows about them. Of course I didn't. What would I know? But one of my mates had got their album in flammable material. He said, you should listen to it. I went to a school in Bradford called Buttershaw Comprehensive School. There were some interesting people went to that school, but it were on massive comprehensive school on a Buttershaw Council estate. I still go back there. One of the interesting things was that, it was, quite a raw time in the 1970s. It's a very political time, and I learned a lot of stuff about politics just from observing what was going on with people at school. It may be older kids at school, but also some of the teachers. And one of the teachers, it's called Mr. Robinson, Jeff Robinson. Sadly, he's no longer with us. But I have to say, he was probably quite a major influence on a lot of things for me. He was an history teacher. He sort of kept his views out of the classroom, but we all knew he was involved with something to do with unions, whatever they did. But he was also involved with things like Rock Against Racism. So him and a couple of others, we knew that they used to help put bands on, or they'd put benefit gigs on. And I was thinking, the same person who teaches me is at this gig. Anyway, and then there was one time where they did, I can't remember what it was a benefit for, but he helped put on Stiff Little Fingers at another venue in Bradford called Queen's Hall. Queen's Hall got changed into a bar, and last time I saw it, everything shut down there. But it was a really good sized venue. Could hold plenty of people. There was like a balcony around. And there's a local band called The Negatives who supported him, if I'm remembering accurately, and they were a good band. Popular locally, always good to see him. I remember going to this Stiff Little Fingers gig, and I probably would have been about 14. I just thought, band will be on. Hopefully they'll be finished by 11:25, which was my last bus to get back to Buttershaw Estate. I'd not said out to my mum or dad about, I'm going to be late, because I didn't know we're going to be late. I didn't know. You went to a gig at St George's Hall, the main venue, and of course everything would run to time, it would finish at a certain time, but this was a different world. Anyway, I remember them, Stiff Little Fingers came on, and I don't think it finished till about 1 a.m. Again, absolutely brilliant atmosphere, and I thought, I can't leave here. Got home eventually, and all was well. I think I must have walked home on my own, which would have seemed a very, very long way. It was only about 3 miles out of town. I thought, I'd like to get in a band. And I had a mate called Neville Cartledge. Nev, if you're listening, you were an influence in a sort of way. And my mate Nev could play the guitar. He was a good guitarist, actually. And his brother was into really unusual music. His brother Mick would get loads of some really obscure stuff, not all punk stuff, some indie stuff, and occasionally you'd be playing it off to see a gig and you think, well, who are they? I don't know anything about it. Now, around that time, I remember talking to people, and we were talking about going to gigs and maybe records. People I knew were into punk. And I remember there was this name of this band came up, and just saying, God, it's a bit hard. They're too hard to listen to. Yeah, it is punk, but it's rough to listen to. And of course, it was a band called Crass. God knows what happened to them. My mate Nev Cartledge said, "Oh, have you ever heard Crass? Have you ever heard him play?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Oh, I'll play it. Our Mick's got this album, Feeding of the 5,000. Now, I don't know if you ever had it on vinyl, but it was 12-inch, but it ran at 45 RPM. So he puts it on record player, and he said it is a bit harsh apparently. So he puts it on, and of course he puts it on at 33 RPM, not realising it. And it comes on, and I'm thinking, bloody hell, you're right, it is hard to listen to. I'm not sure about this. And then he says, "Oh, I've got it on the wrong speed, haven't I?" So he puts it on again, and I thought, "Oh yeah, that's better." And we'll listen to that. It just had that raw sound, but it wasn't affected. You could hear it was together. And I've never heard guitar sound like that, where whatever the lead guitarist was playing, it's just very hard to work it out because it's obscured by the drums and the bass, and this guy who was playing, Andy Palmer, who played rhythm guitar. I remember thinking, I'm going to have to get that. And then I remember buying Stations of the Crass. Always remember this. Fairly long bus journey up to Buttershaw. And I remember sitting on top deck at bus, and opening this Stations of the Crass, the fold-out album sleeve, looking at some of the lyrics. And once I was able to, make out the typeface and everything, just thought, Christ, this is really heavy political stuff. When you say 14 or 15, it's really intense. And I think maybe aside from Stiff Little Fingers, you could disregard the Clash. They wrote about stuff, but it was not that unapologetically brutal. Heavy politics is the way I've described it. And it was really intense, and listening to it, and just, again, it was something that you would either fascinate people or would clear a room. Probably the latter at the time. No, I started work. I was actually still 15 when I started work, when I got a proper apprenticeship. Possibly when I'd started work, I'm not sure, but it was around that sort of, must have been 1980, wouldn't have been earlier. I don't know how we heard it, but it was probably word of mouth. We heard, Crass are playing in Bradford. And I thought, how can they be? I haven't seen any posters, not seen anything advertising it. How do you know these things? It's like, whoever told me, how do you know that? But they played a place which is now a Sikh temple, I believe. At the time, it was called the Italian Club, or it was renamed as the Sweatbox for the gig. And there was an Asian lad called Aki who put on the gig. And Aki was interesting. I never really got to talk to him properly, but he was interesting because he was in a city like Bradford, where there's a large Asian population. He was one of very, very few Asian people that you would see at punk gigs. Still the case, I think. Majority of my mates were white lads, but it was largely, lads who went to gigs. And it's funny because Aki's written about this particular gig in, I can't remember if it was one of Ian Glasper's books, but he's written about it, and he said he was in the toilet and he heard somebody in the who come in, a couple of people who come to the gigs, making racist remarks about Asian people. I thought, I never knew that, but I went to that gig with my mates, and we thought, it'll be like going to St George's Hall or whatever. You'll have to queue up outside. You've got to have a ticket. You'll have to do everything. You'd like go and sit in a certain place type thing. Think again. Think again. We went there. Thing is, because of where we're from, we thought, if we can jib it to get in for nothing, then we'll do that. And we just saw people going in the front door, and then we saw there was a side door down around the side of the building. So we just walked up to it, walked in, and thought someone's going to come out at some point and tell us to get out. Well, nobody did. And we walked through, and it was like a sort of corridor, and it led into the side of this, or near the rear of where this, the main room. And we were more thinking, we've got in for now. It was only like probably £1 or £1.50. Some of that I can still smell it now, this overwhelming smell of glue. Because A lot of people, I'm going to say now, it's not something I was never into. But I knew people, used to sniff glue, and but I'd never experienced the smell like it until I got there. And saw a few people monged out on it. And the temperature was absolutely roasting. And Poison Girls were playing their set when we went in there. And there are all these faces. I'm thinking, well, I've never seen all these people. There are a handful of people that I might recognise. I'm still fairly young. But all these people, and you got the sense, even without talking to people, that a lot of them must have come from outside of Bradford. I was there with 2 or 3 mates, and not knowing quite what to expect. And Poison Girls obviously got a fairly hardcore support for them. They were a bit like Marmite. Didn't necessarily love them. You might dislike them. And Crass came on eventually. I remember one of the women, I think it was Eve, in Nagasaki Nightmare first of all, and I thought, it's a bit more subdued. They went into Steve Ignorant's set, and I just remember that everyone bouncing up. And I think they played Mother Earth. You see, I can still remember it now, over 40 years on. Incredible, just not atmosphere, not like euphoria that you might experience at some bands or at a rave or at a football match. Somewhat more intense than that, and I can't really explain what it was. But it was like when I'd seen Stiff Little Fingers play, or even the Tom Robinson band, or whichever bands I'd seen, and there was some before then, I just cannot remember who they were. You'd get the musicians moving around, the guitarists would move around and be thrashing a guitar around. And what I noticed about the guitarist and bass player for Crass is they just stood there still, like looking into the middle distance. And it was almost this zen-like calmness. It was not sure, it wasn't unsettling, but it was very, very different, because it was almost as if there was stuff a bit like, I don't know if you've ever seen Kraftwerk, the electronic band. They stand there doing very little. And it was like, at the time, the 3 guitarists were stood there doing very little, and that almost added to the intensity of it. Brilliant gig. I went to see Crass a few more times. I went to the Squat gig in London at the Zigzag. I ended up forming a band with a couple of people. We practised one Friday night, and we were hearing that the Squat gig was on. I don't know how, again, we heard it. And going to London, you wouldn't have got a train or a coach. Well, one of the things I noticed from probably 1981, 82, 83, 84, those early 80 years, it was much easier to hitchhike. And you used to see a lot of people hitching. In fact, sometimes you couldn't get a lift because there were so many people on like a junction at M1. Someone just picked us up. No M25 in those days. So he said, well, where are you going? And we said, Zigzag Club. He said, and this bloke in his Morris Minor says, I think I know what it is. And I'll drive through central London, which he had to do. And dropped us off really near where it was. And I think it was meant to be at the Rainbow. It ended up being at the Zigzag. And that was an experience. It was just that experience about everyone coming together. That sense of, I suppose, community. What look I had, I would describe it as UBF, unhindered by fashion or style. I don't think I was ever into like wearing a leather jacket. I might have had a donkey jacket. I think this is the thing, if you're not big on buying clothes or getting clothes, you just probably wear what you go to work in. If you're doing a manual job, you turn up at somewhat like that. I think once we had a friend of ours who was getting married, and there was going to be loads of punks at the wedding, and he was saying something about, you need to colour your hair, you need to do something, and I'm thinking, I'm not doing that. Went to this shop. It was like one of these shops that sell stuff that's carcinogenic. But one of them was spray. So you just sprayed it on your hair and it was black. It ended up with my forehead and my hands being black as well. But it was all right. After 5 or 6 years, it washed out. I did go and see The Clash once. I think it was on my birthday. Might have been about either 81 or 82. And they played at St George's Hall. I actually thought, they're playing. It's my birthday. I would like to go see them. It was a good gig. They were a good band. There's no doubt about it. They were a good band. I know there were a bit of snobbery about, inverted snobbery about The Clash and that, but I think they were all right, and they're still bear listening to now. They were just different in what they did. Bands I like to go see, if I was going to make an effort to go see bands at the time, it was Flux Pink Indians. I've got to see them. You know, you'd hear about playing somewhere obscure, or they're playing in Rochdale in like a building that isn't on the map. And you go there, and they were a good tight act live as well, but like the message as well. Go to see Crass. So it was mainly those sort of Subhumans. Yeah, I was in a band called Anti-System. I helped form it with 3 other lads too, and we used to gig now and then. Nogsy, Phil, George, and we had a singer. The first gig, which was a bit of a shambles, a lad called Dave Damned. And Dave Damned was brilliant because he was just like a character. But he used to write all sorts of strange lyrics, you know, not about the threat of nuclear war, but I don't know, I can't really describe it. But he was a real talent. He did some rehearsals with us. I was probably with him for about first couple of records and then about 14 gigs. It's weird thinking about it. I realised that I was probably into what I thought were the politics more than I was being in a band. Yeah, and Anti-System went on to be quite, popular. And I think there's some lads still playing under that name. I honestly don't know who, but all the very, very best to them. We used to practice in this, it's like a warehouse, this old textile warehouse, and it was converted into, like practice rooms. Finding somewhere where you could practice, but it was also, how did you get your gear there? Now, at one point, I did end up unwisely buying probably the most unsafe car that's ever been on British roads. What a nightmare. There's that phrase, a fool and his money are easily parted. That was actually written about me. So, I can claim, that's my own claim to fame, that idiom. It ended up, we'd move stuff around in this old car. It was an effort to practice. But, we managed to get a few songs, did some demos, sent them off, managed to put a record out. It's just very much of the moment, that thing about, right, come on, we're going to put a record out. How we're going to do it, we'll work that out. But there was that impetus, that energy to say, let's do it. I think if you're going to continue being in a band and continually come up with new ideas, it's a different thing. The DIY thing, that DIY ethic, I thought was really interesting. It struck me it was a lot of hard work. It's one thing I really took from it is that, yes, you can have an alternative economy, one that's based... it's nothing wrong, I don't think, with making a profit. You don't want to make a loss. Crass made a loss, Joy Division made a loss, or was it New Order? But I think it was New Order. When they put Blue Monday out, they made a loss on every copy they sold. Nothing wrong with making a profit. I suppose it's the idea about, is it going to, shareholders and where's it go to from there? The way I see the world, it's very much from a class perspective. Working class, it's about a working class thing. Working class people being able to afford culture, music, whatever you want to call it. How pricey it is now, you look now and it is still pricey. Going on a few years from the 1980s, just if you don't mind, if I just pick up about the indie thing again. Not drifted, but I suppose naturally evolved into me. Your musical tastes get a bit wider. You start to get interested in other things. And I knew a few people who'd been into punk music who then started becoming really involved in rave and dance music and acid house. And what struck me then, again, at the beginning of it, was certainly that same thing. The music was different. Probably not that different in tempo and intensity. To begin with, it was, it was entirely spontaneous, very libertarian. Do whatever you want as long as you don't harm other people, and just put on music and, get a generator. A lot of hard work there, which I think in the end got ruined by certain people. I remember then getting into a band that I think was probably quite punk, in inverted commas, in their attitudes, and that was the KLF. The KLF were, as you know, had a series of number one records, but they deliberately set out to they said to people, follow this formula and you will get a number one record. I know, I used to know one of the lads who was in Chumbawamba, Boff, and we were talking about the KLF, and we were both saying absolutely fascinating because they were subversive in the way that they said, follow a formula for producing a single and it will get you to number one, and lo and behold, it worked for them. But they put everything else out on their own label, KLF Communications, and I saw that link, as it were, between punk ethic of the early 80s and then some dance rave bands that acts were putting out in the early 90s. So I think to a certain extent it continues. And I'm going to sound like I know what I'm talking about here, and this is the listener should bear in mind that I don't. The medium has changed now, but at one time you could get a guitar, you could maybe learn, a few chord shapes and have a basic, 4/4 time drum beat, and you could create a song. Now, of course, I think computer programming has absolutely opened it up. I've tried to do it. I can't pretend that I know how to do it on a computer. But that, I think, takes away... I don't think it needs to be classed as good or bad. It is just there. It's just something that is. But that is something that I think opens up opportunities for people to make music. I always was a bit of a snob about it. I used to think, no, you've got to have guitars, and if you ain't got real guitars, real bass player, real drums, it don't mean anything. And funnily enough, I'll tell you what said it was Phil, what's his name, Phil Oakey, or Oakley. Phil Oakey, him from the Human League. And he said to me at the time, he said, if you're trying to create an emotional response, you can do that on synthesizers and on computers. You've just got to have the creative mind. You've got to know it when you hear it. And I thought, oh yeah, it's a good idea. So maybe we're not playing in a major chord on 6-string electric guitar anymore. There's still people doing stuff, just do it differently. I suppose some of the things I try to do now is to learn from, when I was interested in punk music. One of the things I think I've learnt about punk music, well, particularly from Crass, is it is okay to have your own opinions, even if they are at odds. One thing that I've heard people say, and it got me thinking, is about, if you like Crass, or if you like Conflict, or if you're into punk music, you should adhere to a certain set of beliefs. You should not do this. You should got to be a vegan. You should maybe leather. You shouldn't be into music to make a living, for example. And I actually think, well, no, I think what bands like Crass really thought was, come to your own decision. It doesn't matter what the decision is, but think about it. Think critically about things. And that is why now, thinking critically about things. I don't know if you've ever heard of, I'm going to sound like I'm an academic now, and although my job is a bit academic, there's a writer called Hannah Arendt. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She's a Jewish writer, and she wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. Wrote about the rise of the Nazis and stuff. The final chapter in that book is going on about totalitarianism and ideology. And what she said is, ideology is where when someone asks you a question, or when you're asked to view the world, instead of critically thinking about the situation, having philosophy answer the question, should we eat meat? Is violence ever justified? These sort of things. What Hannah Arendt said is that people look at the world through an ideological lens. So they'll say, socialism, totalitarianism, or whatever it is, whatever ism it is, whether it's current ideology, you end up looking at the world through that lens, and that gives you the answer. And I think, actually, if you use that, if you start to look at things through that sort of ideology, like thinking, oh no, I believe this, so it means that all conservatives are evil people, or it means that all policemen are the scum of the earth, you start to get a very binary view of the world, and it doesn't help you. And actually, it doesn't help you get your views across, because you only end up mixing with people that agree with you. People talk about echo chambers. And what I teach now, I used to do a manual job for many years, and I took redundancy. I won't call it a shop steward, but I was a union rep at work, and I still am. I think that's something that punk has definitely left a legacy with me. One thing I don't like saying is I don't like people particularly being bullied. I don't like underdog being bullied. The other thing is, just because somebody says you've got to do something, a manager says something, I think I think it's okay to say no, I'm not going to do it. And we sometimes get, in fact, this did happen to me in my previous job, where they might say, well, you either like it or lump it. And I would say, well, there is a third choice. I don't like it, and I'm not going to lump it. So what I would like you to do, Mr. Manager, I'd like you to change. And I'm willing to give you some time to change. And of course, they look at you, who do you think you are? I'm the manager. I say, I know you're the manager, but if you don't like it, you can lump it. You can find another job. And it's this thing, what you learn is think who your adversary is and use their words against them. So being a union rep, to me, is not about politics. I've been on strike, and I'm not convinced it's the right thing to do. I think the miners were definitely right in 1984. That's the other thing that had an enormous impact on my life. Listening to Stations of the Crass woke me up. The miners' strike made me realise it's about class. This is what the struggle is about. You cannot rely unfortunately, on middle classes to come and help you. What legacy has it left? I think that's what we're going to say. Well, yeah, I think things like realising that sometimes, and it's going to sound a bit heavy, sometimes you've got to realise that you are the problem, or you're part of the problem. And I probably have been. Sounds like a bit of a confession, but we're all flawed people, and we're all imperfect. And actually, sometimes, even if it's small, on a small scale, it isn't somebody else. You can be angry at the world for something, and you think, actually, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem for being so bloody angry. And then you get angry with people around you, and it ain't nice for them. People can be a bit intense politically. What I've learnt from punk is that no political movement, no cultural movement has all the answers. We've all got to just get through life and just try and think about others if you can. I've done a lot of charity work. I've been a blood donor. To me, thinking we all live in a community, whether we like it or not. If some people are saying, well, I'm an anarchist, I want to live outside the system, that's great. But then you've got a lot of hard work to do. If you don't want to call the police, teach law and look at study into terrorism now, you look where people don't call the police, don't go to settle things in court, but they've still got to have robust ways of settling disputes. What are you going to do when you get into trouble? How are we going to solve these things? Are we going to outsource policing to the police, or are we going to say, well, as a community, no, it's our responsibility. Thinking critically about things. Do get piano lessons, still play the guitar a bit. I could never be bothered joining a band again, not a punk band. I still like listening to some stuff. This is a bit like when you're on Radio 1 and you say, right, can I just say hello to my mum and my dad and my sister and anyone else who knows me? Doing these podcasts, what you're doing with these podcasts, I actually think it's really good to record social history and working class history. We all think, it's a gig that went to and nothing will come of it. 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago, my dad died. That was probably, along with Stations of the Crass and the miners' strike, it was the third most significant, massive impact in my life. But in a good way. Because it just really made me think about, what his values were. And he was really into his music. And you discover, he wasn't into punk. He didn't like Crass. But he was into jazz and he did like a radio programme. But he used to write accounts of things, a bit like what you're doing. Of course, it was all written accounts. And it's fascinating to read some of it and keep in a diary. So I think it's good because it might seem trivial, but these sort of accounts, they're like mass observation. These are accounts that people in 100 years' time might wonder who Crass were, might wonder where Bradford was on the map. England's been flooded and it's the new capital. Thanks for inviting me. I can't think of... I was going to finish off with some jokes, but I end up having to explain the punchline, so no, that's fine. Thanks, Alison.
No, thank you.